Oh, didn't see you there. We're making croissants. Oh yeah.
Alright, so I want to get into the video as soon as possible, but before we begin, I want to give a huge thank you to Joshua Wiseman. I'm using his recipe for today, and he has a ton of videos that always give such clear explanations and have amazing technique, so definitely go check those out if you want to make these for yourself. I'll put a link down in the description. And without further ado, let's get into the recipe. So to start off the recipe, you're going to need to measure out 6 grams of instant dry yeast. And yes, I'm using grams because croissants are a little bit of an exact science, so you're going to have to be a bit more precise with this one. You're also going to want to measure out 130 grams of warm water and then mix those two together and keep doing that until the yeast is fully combined with the water. Now my kitchen scale isn't that accurate when the masses are pretty low, so I put a bowl on top of it to make it a little bit more precise. It's a neat little trick. So then the next thing you're going to want to do is measure out 250 grams of flour. Now in Josh's video, he used bread flour, but I used all-purpose flour and I didn't see much of a difference. As long as you use a good quality flour, you should be fine. So next, I measured out 30 grams of granulated sugar and 5 grams of sea salt. And then I just combined those with the flour from earlier and whisked it up a little bit to make sure it was an even consistency. So next I measured out 25 grams of unsalted butter, and you're just going to melt this and then we're going to incorporate it into the dough. It gives the dough a little bit more liquid to work with. And I know it doesn't seem like that much butter at this point, but trust me, there's going to be so much more butter involved. Paula Deen up in here. Anyway, so we're going to take our yeast mixture now, which is now bloomed, and we're going to add it to our flour, along with our melted butter and 1 egg yolk. Now, I didn't show you the process of me separating an egg because you definitely do not want to see it. It's very bad. And you're just going to mix this until the dough kind of starts to come together. Now once you reach this point, you can wipe off your spatula or whatever utensil you were using to stir and start to get in there with your hands. Now you just want to knead this for a couple of minutes just to make sure that all of the ingredients are evenly distributed and that you have one cohesive ball of dough. So now we are going to take our ball of dough and on a lightly floured surface, hopefully that's lightly floured, we are going to take our dough and kind of do this motion that I'm doing where you throw it down and kind of fold it over itself. As you can see, I'm pretty bad at it. So you only want to do this for a couple of minutes. It's supposed to just give the dough a little bit of strength, stretch out those gluten fibers just a little bit, and make the dough a little bit easier to handle. Then we can just shape our dough into a ball by kind of folding it into itself to create a nice smooth layer on top. Then we can just plop it into a bowl and cover it in plastic wrap. Oh yeah, have a good time with that plastic wrap. Yeah, struggle, take the whole thing off, redo it, yep.
And you're going to let your dough sit in the fridge for 10 minutes, and with this time, you can give yourself a well-deserved coffee break. Once you finish your coffee, take your dough out of the fridge and we're going to do what's called the dough's first turn. That sounds like an episode of a kids show. But basically what you're going to do is take the side of the dough and pull it up and stretch it a little bit, and then we're going to fold it into the middle. And you're just going to do this around the entire edge of the dough until it's all been folded. Then you're going to place it back in the bowl and put it in the fridge again for 10 more minutes. Now we are going to repeat that process again for its second fold, and you want to make sure that you're being careful with the dough so you don't tear any of the gluten strands. Then you can rest that in your fridge for 25 more minutes. Next, we're going to rip off a decently sized piece of parchment paper. That does not look like the best tear, but then we're going to bring out our dough and put it on there so we can begin to roll it out. The dimensions that we're going for here are 7 inches by 7 inches, and I just did this by taking a measuring tape and measuring the diameter of the dough. And once it was 7 inches by 7 inches, I took the parchment paper and folded that over so then we had a 7 inches by 7 inches square. And once we had that, I could flip over the parchment paper, and then that kind of sealed the dough in a place where I could roll it out into that shape that we want, which is a 7 by 7 inch square. although be careful when you're rolling it out because you don't want to press too hard, otherwise that could rip the parchment paper. So make sure you apply even pressure. We don't want a lot of lumps in this. Make it nice and flat, and it was a lot of work, but we have it now. Now we are going to take our dough and we're going to put it in the fridge for at least an hour or overnight if you would like. So now we're going to make our beurrage. So you're going to need another sheet of parchment paper, which makes me want to tear apart this kitchen, but it's okay. I'm totally fine. Remember earlier when I said that we were going to be using a lot more butter? That time is now. That is not enough butter. That is enough butter. And now we're going to measure out 138 grams of this butter to make our beurrage. So to make our beurrage, we're going to lay out our butter in a 4" by 4" square. And I kind of tried to do this by laying them all out, but it was way too long. So what I ended up doing is kind of breaking the butter in half. It does not need to be perfect at this point because we're going to even it out later. So just kind of get that butter in there into a 4" by 4" square, and then we're going to use the same process as before by folding up the parchment paper around the butter, and then we're going to flip it over and use our rolling pin to pound it out a little bit and make sure that it is nice and even. Now after a quick check to make sure that our beurrage is still 4" by 4", we can take it and put it in the fridge to keep it cold. So now we're going to pull out our beurrage and our dough, and this is where the quote-unquote croissanting really starts, so you're going to want to pay close attention to this part. We are going to lightly flour a workstation. That is not a light flour, but we're going to go with it anyway. We're going to place our dough down and just kind of scrape away some of that excess flour. We'll probably use it later. So now we are going to gently roll out each of the corners of our dough, and then we're going to place our beurrage on there diagonally. Then we can fold up each of the corners over the butter to kind of entrap the butter inside of our dough. And then we'll just pinch those seams shut to keep it all nice and closed up. We don't want any openings for the butter to be able to seep out. And then we can just tighten up those seams and then flip it over to have your encased dough. Now we're just going to lightly press down on our dough with our rolling pin. And this is just to do a little preliminary spreading out of the butter layer throughout the dough to make sure that it has an even layer all throughout the dough before we roll it out. So make sure that you're only pressing, not rolling at this point. Now we are going to roll out our dough so that it is 18 inches long. Now in Josh's video, he made a point of only rolling in one direction, and this is to protect the butter layer and make sure that it gets evenly distributed. It doesn't get smushed or broken up while inside the dough. And that's going to make our croissants really nice and fluffy and flaky, and just generally the mouth-watering deliciousness that you love and deserve in life. Now we're going to take the bottom edge and fold it 3/4 of the way up the dough. Then we'll take the top edge and fold it that last quarter of the way down so that the ends connect up evenly. We'll just lightly pat those down to make sure that they stick, and then we'll take the larger part, the one that's closer to you, and we'll fold it all the way up over so that it meets up at the top. Then we can turn that sideways and press lightly on it with our rolling pin to make sure that all the layers stick together. Don't press too hard though, because we don't want to ruin that butter layer. Now we need to rest our dough before the second fold. So take it and put it in some plastic wrap and then stick it in the fridge for 1 hour. And after our hour is up, it is time for the second fold. So go grab your dough from the fridge and get it out of that plastic wrap and place it on a lightly floured work surface. Now we're going to roll this the opposite way that we did last time. So that's going to be the long way. You should be able to see all of the folds towards you. And we're once again going to roll that out to 18 inches long. Now I started to get a little tear in one of my butter layers. So make sure that you flour your rolling pin before you start and roll really delicately. So once we've confirmed that our dough is 18 inches long, we can do our second fold. And for this one, we're going to take the top edge and fold it 2/3 of the way down. And then we're going to take the bottom edge and fold it up over so it's at the top, just like you would do if you were folding a letter. Now we're going to take our dough and wrap it in plastic wrap once again and place it in the fridge to rest for up to 12 hours. We really want to rest this for as long as possible so that the gluten fibers are well rested and won't provide any resistance to us while we're rolling it out. I find it easiest to rest the dough overnight, so the next morning I took out the dough and we are ready for the final rolling out of our dough. We are going to roll this out until it is roughly 10 inches wide and 1/4 of an inch thick. It doesn't quite matter how long it gets at this point, but as long as it fits the 1/4 of an inch thick and 10 inches wide parameters, you should be fine. Now my dough actually started resisting me a bit during the rolling out process. As you can see, it's not really going very far and is kind of scrunching back up into its original position. So I actually chose to wrap it up in plastic wrap and put it back in the fridge to rest for another 30 minutes. After I pulled it out, it was definitely much easier to roll out, so definitely do this if your dough starts resisting you. It's also really important because if you don't, you could end up pressing your butter layers into your dough and that will ruin your croissants. So definitely, if your dough starts resisting you, rest it for a little bit. It'll definitely do a lot of good in the long run. And now that I've gotten my hands on a thesaurus, it is finally time to cut our croissants. And in order to do this, I laid out my measuring tape so that I could have a guide. And I took a long kitchen knife and made little score marks every 4.5 inches on the bottom half. Then I used my markings and found kind of the middle in between them. And you can see I'm following that up and making a mark in the middle. We want to make triangles for our croissants. So that's how we're going to get those shapes. Then I used the score marks I made and just kind of connected them up with my knife and made the final cut, making those triangles that are going to be our croissants. Now I had a little bit of excess kind of small ones on the sides, and I just kind of removed those for now. I didn't quite know what to do with them at this point. I got 5 normal sized croissants in the middle that looked really good. Now we're going to take each of our triangles and elongate them gently, just kind of stretch them out a little bit, and then we're going to start at the big end and very tightly roll those up. Try and get as many rotations of the croissant as you can. So I'll just roll up the rest of them here real quick. And I actually decided to take those scraps that I had earlier and make little mini croissants out of them. I just thought that they were really cute, and I put a lot of effort into this dough and I'm not wasting a single ounce of it. Once we have rolled all our croissants and placed them point side down on a sheet pan, we can brush them very lightly with an egg wash. We don't want to brush on too much at this point, just enough to prevent them from getting a skin. Now we can cover our croissants and allow them to proof for 2 hours at 78 degrees. It was a warm day, so I just let them sit at room temperature. You can use your spare time to clean up your messy workstation. You don't want Colette from Ratatouille coming after you.
Keep your station clear, or I will kill you!
Okay, back to the recipe. Now when they're done proofing, they should have doubled in size, the layers should have begun to separate slightly, and they should jiggle slightly when shaken. Okay. Now before we bake them, we're going to give them one more coat of egg wash, and then they are going to go into a 400-degree oven for 15 to 20 minutes or until they are golden brown. And now it's time for a beautiful baking time lapse. And yes, it is beautiful. I don't want to hear anybody being like, "Oh, Aidan, your oven door is so dirty." No, it's not. I spent 30 minutes with heavy cleaning solvents and a razor blade scraping gunk off of that oven door so that I could get a nice shot for you all. I also had to go to the store and replace my oven light so that we could see. I put work into this and you are not going to take that away from me. So enjoy. Alright, so we made croissants. This recipe was definitely a challenge, but I think that the effort is well worth it. I ended up with these wonderful flaky pastries that my family and I really enjoyed eating. They were so delicious, and so definitely I would encourage you to try this recipe for yourself. Go check out Josh's video and let me know how they are. I have a lot more videos coming up on my channel, and speaking of which, I recently turned 18, and for my birthday I decided to make a bunch of my favorite Korean dishes. So if you want a cooking tutorial on any of those, let me know down in the comments. Please make sure to stay tuned, share with your friends, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks!